I sat on this roulette table, and then they serve you drinks also. Then,
Of course, want to
so
keep you there.
I took a run. I didn't eat, so I took a drink, and it like immediately hit, and it started being fun a little bit, for like at least half an hour, and then I doubled my $50, and had like 2-3 free drinks. So I was like, that's cool.
This is Music Not Diving with Scuba.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. Okay, we are welcoming back one of our most featured guests on the show this week, Recondite. Featured twice on our previous incarnation, the audio-only Not a Diving podcast. And he's one of the most thoughtful people, I think, in dance music, generally speaking. He's had a pretty long career at this point, starting off on his own label, Plangent. He's released with us on Hot Flush. And he's been part of the kind of wider melodic techno, I suppose, scene for the past few years, very much associated with Afterlife. And in recent times, supporting ANYMA on his enormous shows around the world, very much part of that setup. So he's kind of our man on the inside on what is one of the absolute biggest things in dance music today, and something which has been, I think, probably ignored to a large extent by the more self-regarding parts of the dance press. So we're going to get a fascinating insight into the workings of all that on the show this week, and also we're going to get into some of those AI and artistic questions too. So a fascinating episode with a fascinating guy. I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's just get into it, shall we? My conversation with Recondite. Recondite, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How you doing?
Pretty good. I can't complain, to be honest.
This is your third appearance on the podcast.
Yeah, third.
The first one with video, however.
Correct.
So nice to put a face to a voice for everyone else, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was a little while ago though that we did the last one. It was like summer of 23, I think, that we. But then you were on one of the very, very early ones. Well, I think maybe you were on episode 2 or 3 of the first one. So.
Yeah. And I also remember when we talked about you planning to have a podcast in the first place.
Yeah, well, we're in the 5th year of the show, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah,
really crazy.
I've been following it ever since, and I listened to most of the episodes, not every episode, but I really admire the approach and the development.
Okay, well, you've played your part. I'm going to play more of a role today. So we were just talking about off mic about how you're feeling much better about yourself, partly due to a lack of touring commitments.
Yeah, it's not only connected to that fact, but somehow in my reflection, it plays a big role. I love being a touring artist, but it comes with its ups and downs, I would say. Everybody who does it probably knows it. And for some reason, during my strong years, if you will, between, let's say, 2012 and until 2020, while there was suddenly some kind of, higher demand in my artist profile, and I wanted to meet the demand, and I was on tour a lot, sometimes between 100, 130 shows a year.
I mean, really? Was that 130 is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. But I really struggled with it, but I wanted to push through and I wanted to do it once, so I did it for in this volume, 2-3 years. And then, I had tinnitus and I felt like, okay, this is impossible. I can't go on like this. Either the structure would have to be completely changed or I have to just do less. And then I did less and I already felt better. But then COVID came and it was like this external cut,
Right.
Not like the internally intended forced one, but it came from the outside. So I was a little bit, also feels weird.
Yeah.
No, but in general, I feel really good. It's not only connected to the fact that I'm touring less, but it's apparently, if I don't have to leave home so much, I apparently feel better. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely share that. I mean, I realised after many years of touring that actually I get quite homesick, and I don't necessarily notice it at the time, or I don't associate the feeling
Yeah.
with wanting to be at home, but it's just that kind of feeling of like general kind of unease, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you kind of clock what it is, it's like, oh, actually, yeah, it's just that, you know, I prefer being at home, basically, just a
Yeah.
really basic.
I mean, you
kind
can
of
go
level.
deep in it. Like, is it a stronger sense for security that you need or want to have? For me, definitely. But I am reflecting that I know where that comes from. I know how to treat it, but I don't feel like I need to force myself out of my comfort zone in every aspect of my life all the time, just in order to be a perfect, optimized human being. You know what I mean? Like, that's not my goal. Even though nowadays sometimes it seems like this is the unspoken rule of everybody.
Sure. I mean, the shows you have been doing have been, some of them have been pretty big shows. I mean, actually, I was going back to our previous conversation from a couple of years ago, and one of the roles you have played on the show has been like the inside man at Afterlife, and that whole kind of like the phenomenon of Afterlife, and latterly it's kind of like turned into that ANYMA thing, which is, I think, looked upon with some curiosity by people in maybe, I don't know, by I think by people generally speaking, because it is such a huge thing, but it's also, I've noticed, kind of ignored by a lot of the kind of more quote unquote serious, well, certainly the serious sides of a dance press. Actually, the dance press, just generally speaking, just doesn't seem to cover it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it was completely ignored by RA, almost completely ignored by Mixmag.
Yeah.
But it is, and actually, this is kind of shared, I think, with the other big phenomenon of the last few years, which is Fred again. Like, both of these two things, which have really caught the public imagination, just seem to be beyond the pale for the dance press. But I mean, the Afterlife thing is interesting because, I mean, there's been a kind of arc to it, and you've been very much involved from the start up till now, up to the most recent, in these crazy enormous shows that have been, you know, going on. You said in the previous conversation that we had that whilst Afterlife was still Afterlife, because obviously it's not really anymore, you talked about a sort of commonality of musical approach between the different artists whose actual music was a bit different, because obviously your music is definitely not typical of this stuff at all. But you talked about, like I said, like a sort of a commonality of approach, and how has that changed over the kind of intervening couple of years, where obviously Afterlife has kind of like fallen by the wayside, and now it's just this kind of like enormous kind of ANYMA kind of megalith going on. Talk a bit about it in general.
Yeah, in general, I mean, there are no like defined Afterlife events at the moment. I don't really know if they will be back or not. I don't have any inside information on that. But I think it wasn't a bad idea to put a halt on it a little bit, because the whole thing developed for a while and it kept growing and growing, and it kept growing out of different reasons. One of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, is definitely the drive of ANYMA, and what he kept going for and he kept striving for over the years. That was at some point it was like a reinforcing dynamic. You know, it was reinforcing itself. Afterlife was reinforcing ANYMA, and then ANYMA was reinforcing Afterlife. You know, it was, so it's a big and pretty well constructed situation, or it has been and still is in a different way now, as you said, with the big ANYMA shows. But from my point of view, as being almost something as a founding member, is that it was an extraordinary development of basically also captivating a whole genre at some point, you know, like this melodic techno label that can be interpreted in different ways in terms of, you know, some people say that because you said that maybe musically I'm not so much in this realm. Some people would say, yeah, on the contrary, that's
you're the real shit.
Not just me, but
I know. I mean, because I remember you saying back years ago that your biggest influence was Dial Records and all that.
Yeah,
that stuff.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's, you could say maybe that's the original source.
Some
people would say that.
That
anyway.
would be the very, very ground source, I would say. I mean, but maybe more this 2012 until 2015 mix between Osgood, Innovisions, dystopian, life and death.
Yeah.
Like the hybrid of these four, I think, is what melodic techno made.
Yeah. So it's the really deep atmospheric stuff, but also fusing that with some quite big room elements.
Exactly. And also just basically melodies.
Yep.
Just using them in a little bit more obvious way. And that's what I did also. That's also what I still do. So I still I don't feel like weird if I say that I'm also doing melodic techno, because in theory I still would count myself towards that genre, but it just expanded in so many interesting areas.
I mean, many of these genre terms seem to have changed meaning, right?
Yeah.
So like when people say techno now, quite a lot of people just think you mean hard techno, or like that
that's true.
That kind of hard techno.
No, that's
you
true.
know?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's definitely been a blurring, and it seems like there are, like the kind of big catch-all terms, of which techno is one, because obviously there's many things going on within techno, and maybe melodic techno is that too. Maybe it's got that big that there are subgenres and different things happening within it, perhaps.
Yeah, probably as it comes with time and things developing, getting bigger, then you have subgenres. But yeah, I mean, the whole Afterlife development was very interesting to be witnessing from the inside as a protagonist. I think growing from, moving away from life and death, creating Afterlife by itself, doing the first events at DC-10 on Ibiza, with like horror movie bird cages as a decoration.
Yeah, right. I played at a couple of those parties. Yeah.
Towards, coming up with the Hanger Man and this very, like...
I've got to say that the Hanger Man is one of the best pieces of branding that there has ever been in dance music. It really, really was. Effective.
And also with the name, And the first sampler with the Realm of Consciousness, this whole thing with the stars, and it was a pretty well put together concept, and that's sometimes the recipe for this unforced beauty. If the things come together pretty organically, it doesn't feel like that anymore. But at the beginning, it really was. I mean, of course, there was kind of this mastermind sitting behind, and I remember calls with Matteo on Skype, like him with this. Maybe I told this story already.
I don't know. I'll carry on.
No, it was just like with this chewed up pencil.
Oh no, I don't think I have heard this story.
Like just like a mad professor coming up with these ideas, and I was like, okay, he's up to something. And then it got bigger and bigger, and also not only on purpose. Also, I would say.
Yeah, because I mean, these things, when they catch on, they acquire a momentum of their own, don't they? So,
yeah, sometimes even overwhelming for all the protagonists.
I mean, how much do you think he was surprised by the success?
I would say indifferently surprised. In terms of, it's not a surprise, but it's also wasn't expected in that way.
I suppose it's what they were aiming for, but you can never be sure it's going to happen.
Yeah, aiming for in this subconscious kind of way. Right. Like pulling the right strings without really knowing it in that way. Still there is. I wouldn't say it was completely designed on the.
Okay, so it wasn't. It wasn't like engineered into that.
No, I don't. I wouldn't say that. In hindsight, you could say that, but during the time, it was also too chaotic within. But then again, in the chaoticness, there was this professional structure implemented over time. And this professional structure obviously then played a big role in order to execute it in the first place. I mean, without building that team around Afterlife. And a lot of members of this team are still, with ANYMA shows, like production. And this is it's also a family affair somehow, you know, because there are really little people there since the beginning, and that's also why maybe I am still there sometimes, you know, and get invited, because it has a little bit of this Italian family affair situation. That's not completely neglectable.
Yeah. Okay. You're about 15 minutes into this episode, so well done for sticking around so long. I'm just going to take this opportunity to tell you about the ways you can support the show. First of all, like this video and subscribe to the channel. That's the number one thing. But also we have a Patreon, which you can get involved with, patreon.com/Scuba Official. There are 2 reasonably priced tiers there. The more expensive of which, just $10 a month, gets you all of the music that we release on Hot Flush Recordings and our affiliated labels, high quality download formats, like a Bandcamp subscription, but also supporting this podcast. So head over there and do that, or just like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll let you get back to the episode. Thank you. It's interesting, actually. I was having a conversation yesterday with someone who's just in the process of starting a party, starting a promotion. And he's asking me for tips and stuff, and like, you know, just, you know, going through the kind of just the little details of putting on a night. And there are certain things which are as applicable, I think, to huge events as they are to tiny events. And a great example actually was you know, exposed to me the other day. A good friend of mine played at one of these big Fred Again shows, right? The current ones that they're doing, the USB shows with the kind of big sheets on the scene. You've probably seen the pictures. So she was one of the support acts. It was Brooks. I'm going to say hey, so it was. It's fine. And she's, I would say, she's definitely up and coming, has a bit of a name, but like is not, you know, would have been not known, I think, to the majority of the people in that audience, right? It was a big arena. There must have been 10,000 people there or something. And so she was
it in the UK?
No, it was in New York.
Okay.
So she was happy just to be playing, obviously. But then after the show, they gave her a bunch of flowers and they really made her feel special. And I only know about it because she was posting it all over social. She was obviously so happy to be feel part of this big thing. Yeah. And when you do that, I think it doesn't matter whether it's a tiny party or the biggest thing. You get that kind of feeling of, you know, togetherness, which really I think transfers itself to the audience. Yeah. And all of these big parties, I think the successful ones, the most successful ones, I think all have an element of that. So when you're talking about family, that kind of real sense, and I genuinely think that bleeds through to the audience too, you know, and it really kind of takes people on a journey in that kind of way.
I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah. And I think that it's also friendship somehow. I don't know if it has to be friendship, but in the case of Afterlife, there is a lot of friendship involved. Over the years, I think you can also do it when you know, just generally be respectful and warm and incorporating a person, also not just on an artist level, but also on a personal level, like as you said with the flowers, and just showing appreciation on a personal level. But then when also friendship comes into play, it's an even bigger connection. That's why I also, for me, it's for example, when I get invited to play an ANYMA show, it's sometimes, of course, I have thoughts like, do I deserve it, or does it fit, or am I the right person? And then I think, is it only because for friendship? But the cool thing is that, and I really try to be open and reflective about this. At the end of the day, after the shows, and then also after the whole event, it always feels very, very matching and coherent. And I actually also talked to Matteo about this. And he also gave me the compliment that one thing that he's sure of when he knows that I'm playing before him is that, first of all, I'm not playing like the big Afterlife hits, obviously, right, because I'm playing in a live set and I play my own stuff. And second of all, you know, you've seen my sets. I think, of course, the tracks themselves have like changed a little bit, but the whole semantics of my sets are, you know, they can be very pounding and they can be quite, you know, functional and even operating on a bigger scale in terms of crowd size or location, and it can be pretty dynamic and impactful. but there is always room for more after my sets.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
So I never leave the ground burned. You know.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay.
You know, never.
Yeah,
that
sure.
that never happens.
Right.
That's a pro and a con. You know, you might want to be able to do that,
Right.
but it within my personality range. This is not implemented. Like that form of extreme execution is not something that I do,
Right.
in no level. So it also not when I play a set, but it's not going to be boring, slow, or just not working. It's going to be the perfect mix for somebody else to, with this range of intensity that ANYMA brings, not just with the visuals, but also with this music and the production it has, to basically have a perfectly warmed up crowd.
Yeah. Well, that's it.
Yeah.
Warmed up, right?
Yeah.
It's the perfect
Yeah.
warm up set,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
And particularly, you know, in that setting, and I suppose as a headline act, the last thing you want in your headline show is
Yeah.
some, you know, wanker before playing
Yeah.
all the big tunes, right?
And it happens more often than you think.
Oh, I'm sure. Because I suppose that's the thing. Because when you're playing, we'll get into some examples of these shows in a second. But when you're playing, when you've got the opportunity to play a show of that size, I suppose the instinct that most people have is just to make as bigger impact as you possibly can, which is completely understandable. But then I suppose you also have to have some self-awareness and realize that everyone's there to see the headliner. Really, you know,
course.
as much as the kind of brand. Particularly with those Afterlife shows, as much as that Afterlife brand was important, really it's the headliner that people are there to see for the most part anyway.
Absolutely.
The ticket buyers, yeah.
Absolutely, especially over the years. When you have a party like this, maybe at the beginning it's more about the general vibe, but already then you have the pulling horse that does it.
You have to have a ticket seller, for
yeah.
sure.
But the bigger the shows get, the more this is going to be a factor. Overall, I mean, of course, some people ask me, but do you feel well? Do you feel good playing these shows? Don't you think that you kind of have to work on your own thing a little bit more in terms of like development? I mean, you're playing for somebody else mostly. It's not about you. Those events are not about you. And I say, yeah, that's true. But not judgingly, unfortunately or fortunately, that's not how I think. You know, I'm not saying that I have this idealistic approach of just playing for the vibe and I'm just there to do my job. And of course, I also think about my own career. But then I, make the calculation and think, would I not want to play this opportunity that I got? Playing in those locations just because of personal strategy, career ideas, and I can't do this because then I look like I'm always second number, and these type of seems weird to me to think like that. Maybe it's one of my weaknesses when it comes to being a businessman, but I take those weaknesses with like no problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's a couple of specific shows I want to talk about. I mean, the obvious one to start with is the Sphere. Yeah. Because, I mean, this was I think the opening of it, really caught people's imaginations. Like, it's a pretty unique thing. I think it's one of those things which is going to be copied. And, I guess it's sort of similar to like the new generation of stadiums, like SoFi in LA being a good example of one, with the enormous screens going all the way around. And this kind of like all immersive video format is, something which I think is going to become more common. But the Sphere itself is pretty amazing. Just talk about it. I mean, I haven't been there, so and probably most people watching this haven't been there either. So talk about it in general.
So for me, it was the first time in Las Vegas overall. So the whole experience was pretty impressive.
Are you a gambler?
No, I'm not a gambler.
Okay.
Actually, I was once. One thing that I like when I'm at places that I haven't been before, I take a cab or an Uber and go out of the city, and I take a run back in, and then I was with my running gear, and I have my ID, my phone, and a little bit of cash in like a small pocket, and I was running through, and then I was running through this old Vegas strip. You know, not the big one with the Belvedere or this fountain, you know, but the old one where there used to be this, or I think it's still there actually, this cigarette man, you know, with this wave, you know, from the really old Vegas. Yeah, the Marlboro Man from the really old Vegas movies. So I just accidentally ended up there. And then there was this, I think it was called Golden Nugget or something, this really old casino.
Yeah, the Golden Nugget. Yeah.
That is very.
Yeah, when Sinatra used to sing that, I believe. I think I'm right about that.
I don't know, but it looked a little bit like more accessible in terms of I don't have to wear a suit or anything.
Okay, a sort of down market casino.
So I was like, these people look like, you know, I could go in there with my running dress, you know, it wouldn't probably matter. So I went in, and because it was the first time, honestly, I was in a casino like that, I mean, I know what roulette is. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to play blackjack. I have no idea about this game. I learned a little bit of theory of poker, but I also wouldn't want to sit on a poker table. I probably would get destroyed. But I understand the pure luck that is needed for roulette.
Yeah, I mean that's the real kind of like inject it into your veins kind of thing. Yeah.
So I think I had like $50 with me or something cash. And then I sat on this roulette table, you know, and then they serve you drinks also then. You know?
Of course, want to
so
keep you there.
I took a run, I didn't eat, so I took a drink, and it like immediately hit, and it started being fun a little bit, you know. And then, you know, I always did like, this was this $10 minimum table, so very small. And then I just, another, just $10 on the, basically always black red, nothing else. Like, and we had 3 times black now. It has to be right now, red now. So, and then it was red, you know. And this calculation worked for like at least half an hour, and then I doubled my $50, you know, and had like 2-3 free drinks. So I was like, that's cool. So I went out with like $100 and a little buzz, you know.
Well, I mean, that's what you want, right? I'm pretty sure it doesn't always work like that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that. But I have to say, I really gambled very responsibly. You know, 3 times red now has to be black. This kind of worked somehow. You know? And I was strong enough to understand, this is not going to work forever. Like, if you leave now, you're going to have a nice evening. Like a very subtle, good feeling of making $50, you know. And that was great. And that was before Sphere. And sorry, I had this discourse now.
No, not at all.
But, and then Sphere, it was the evening with Peggy Who and ANYMA. And what should I say? I mean, it's the most professional venue that I've ever been to. Like when it comes to from like green room, like backstage, organization, hosts, technical rider, hospitality rider, like all the amenities that you need, like mixer, technical stuff, and obviously that infrastructure from the Sphere itself combined with ANYMA's production team is kind of like Champions League level of at least what I experienced. Of just being taken care of on show day. And then I don't know if you remember a little bit the setup of the Sphere for ANYMA. So he had this 2 really big kind of like pillar looking
with
structures.
the cables and stuff like
yeah. And then he was like on top of this really high standing thing. So everybody else, like from I think also Rampa played there, and Solomon, and Peggy Who, and everybody played in front of that structure, like on this DJ table, a little bit closer to the crowd. And then you had on the floor, you had the standing crowd, and then you had obviously those enormous seats and ranges, or how do you call it?
Banks of like
And I mean, I was there the day before. I wanted to check the venue before, and I saw Solomon the day before because it was always Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and so I had a little bit of an idea. And I looked also, I looked at the show from the seats point of view, which was very impressive because I saw the ANYMA show there as well. And obviously it's like this IMAX on steroids experience.
Right.
So you have stuff falling, not literally, but feels like falling from the top. But obviously when I went on stage just before playing, in the seconds before playing, it's a whole different experience, because suddenly you kind of stand, first of all, in the center of attention, but then also you stand kind of in the center of the sphere in a way, because that DJ booth was like a little bit centered. And then you look up, and that was really like a mind-bending feeling, because I've never seen a screen like completely surrounding me in that scale.
Right.
You know, it felt like a little bit like, almost like if you were like 3D, or not 3D glasses, but VR glasses. But you are still in a real room.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
I mean, of course, if you wear VR glasses, you also still in there, but you don't see the real room.
Yeah,
anymore.
of course. Yeah. Yeah. Headset. I remember the first time I put on a VR headset was when I was a kid, when they first came out.
Yeah.
And they had one in like one of the video game shops, and I just couldn't get my head around it at all. Like, you know, kept like looking down, trying to look at my hands and stuff, and just like, kind of pretty disorientating.
It is. I just recently, I was, during Christmas, I was at a friend's house, and the kids, they kind of got like these meta glasses, or what this is.
Okay, yeah.
And then I checked them out, and there's this built-in like feature of this museum thing. You can go to like museums and you can buy like certain excerpts of literal real museums that you can look at, and then suddenly you are in this art gallery, and you want to start walking.
Right, okay. Yeah, but you can't, right?
Yeah, you shouldn't. Yeah, because you're gonna run against the table or whatever, you know. But it's really, you want to like so I think if this stuff gets more refined, because you can still tell the pixels, because you are so close to the screen, you know. Even if it's like high resolution, you can tell that it's not really HD type vision, not super realistic, and this is probably going to improve at some point.
Sure.
And then this really has potential for people to get lost in, I think, to kind of mix up actual reality with this. I think it's possible to have these issues in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay. How was the actual set? Well, you just we got to the point where you get up on stage and you look up and it's like, fuck.
Yeah.
So basically, to what extent are you commanding the attention of the crowd? Because obviously that's, you know.
I think with my music I have one advantage, that the sublimity that it has sometimes throws people off guard and immediately catches their attention, because by not taking their attention forcefully, I'm doing something different than most. And especially on those events, this effect works really well, because people expect big effects and they will get them. But if something more sublime and some more, sublime is the right word, right?
I think so.
Yeah, like some more discreet, a little bit more like slower, like.
Okay, no, yeah, a little bit more, just more subtle, basically.
Subtle,
yeah.
That's the word. Sorry, what is sublime?
Sublime is sort of it's how would you I mean, I don't know what the definition of sublime is, but it sort of implies something that's good in some way, in some kind of ethereal kind of a way.
Okay, no, I it's more subtle, I mean.
Yep.
And then with like starting the intro, I played a little bit longer intro, a little bit more ambient, a little bit more atmospheric, because it was one of the really first slots, and people were still getting in, but then suddenly after 10 minutes it was already quite full, because it was also the Friday, which is a good night and stuff. And then it went great. I mean, what should I say? I mean, I would tell you if I would have had difficulties, to be honest.
Was it, I mean, like materially speaking, the difference between having that level of, you know, competing content, to use that word, right? Because I mean, obviously people are there at least partly just for the experience of being in the venue, right? I mean, we obviously bought an ANYMA ticket and they want to see Peggy, whoever, all that stuff. But really, with someone like that, a big part of the curiosity for people coming in has got to be the visuals and just being there.
I have to say that the team there. They made really cool visuals for me also. Very abstract and minimal gray visuals, with like lines and a little bit of like white noise in terms of just less figurative, more graphically and organically also, with like wavy structures, quite dark. And I think that I loved this. It was amazing, to be honest.
How much was that happening live? How was that all pre-programmed? How much did you have to tell them about what you were going to play? All of that
they
stuff?
proposed some ideas, and they, like I said, this ANYMA visuals team.
Yep.
I know them since ages.
Sure.
Also, Michael Tietze, who also works there.
Works at the Sphere?
No, at ANYMA team.
Yeah.
He used to do my visuals.
Ah, right.
Like
I kind of
10 years ago.
Yeah, okay.
So he knows exactly what aesthetics I appreciate and fit to my music. And therefore it was just great. This really low key, but given the fact of the craziness of so if you combine something that is in theory not as jumping in your face, but then you apply it on a scale like the Sphere, suddenly,
of course, it acquires
suddenly
impact.
yeah, exactly. And that was how this felt, this show. Yeah, it was something that could be like really serene and held back in another environment, but in this environment it was like and that also was the crowd reaction. So yeah, that was I think one of the most intense and most coherent and most special experiences that I ever had as a touring live act on stage.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I mean, of course it does. Tell me about the show in Brussels. I mean, obviously we talked about the early Afterlife shows being production focused, but then they kind of developed into these huge video walls, which I suppose reached the kind of the peak with the Sphere thing. The show in Brussels was the opposite of that, correct?
Yeah, because it didn't have visuals,
right?
None at all, which was
but again, really visually striking.
Yeah, but no screens, and that is always like a little bit of, I don't know if it's so much anymore, maybe not, but it used to be a little bit of a debate. Like, it's all about the screen and everybody wants to take pictures of the screen and videos of the screen, and it's not about the party.
I mean, people were bitching about that.
Yeah. But there in front of the Atomium in Brussels, it was the opposite, because it was basically a huge outdoor event without screens. And I had the privilege to play basically the sundown set, and it was an amazing day. The weather was great, and if you have ever seen the Atomium, when the sunset starts.
Just describe it a little bit for people.
Yeah, it was built for this expo in Brussels, and it's this really chrome, shiny looking, huge structure where it looks like a lot of like really big metal shiny balls are connected with each other through like planks and
to look like
poles,
atoms, basically.
Yeah. And it's supposed to show like a structure of an atom connected to atoms connected to each other, if I'm right.
Yeah. Possibly. I'm not a physicist, but
yeah, I'm also not a physicist, but and because of the chrome structure, the light reflects really well, obviously, and the sunset, when the sunset comes and the sky turns like orange and violet, it reflects with the Atomium really well. So it played basically also like a huge role in the visual environment there, obviously, as you said. But the vibe was completely different because it was more about the coherent underlining vibe of a visual experience, not like so effectuous, and not so volatile in terms of what's happening. So it was like slow, gradually change of environment when it comes to light. Obviously, when after me, ANYMA played, there was also more like actual light shows, not in terms of visuals, but lasers and stuff like this. But still, it was pretty. Compared to his usual shows, it was pretty. Discreet compared to that. And I mean,
to what extent was that a conscious decision on their part to push back a little bit against the, as you said,
I'm pretty sure it was a conscious decision to offer something different to that always visual thing. And then we can talk about the next one, and those are the 3 big ANYMA shows that I played so far. The next one was at the Pyramids.
Obviously, they did a few. I mean, there have been a few shows done at the Pyramids, and I think they've put a stop to them now. I think the Egyptian government said,
I heard of that. Yeah.
No more of this. But I mean, it doesn't get more iconic, to use that word in its proper sense.
Yeah,
it doesn't get more iconic of a location than the Pyramids of Giza, right? I mean,
and there it was kind of a mix of the two. So basically, ANYMA played 2 sets there. There was one stage setup on the one end of the dance floor, if you will, and then there was the screen setup on the other side of the dance floor, if you will, like opposite. And I played on the stage where you had the pyramids in the backdrop, and I was basically facing to the crowd. And at the end of this floor, there was the other stage with the screen. The screen was not running though, so nobody really cared about it. You didn't even see it if you didn't know it. Yeah. But there was like nothing but open space in the back, and just very like minimal lighting, and also towards the sunset. So for me, a similar experience and a very energetic crowd. And I played also a much more energetic set there, because it kind of was this, maybe also because of the warm-up that was before me, and it was a little bit more of an energy already in the crowd. And I picked that up, and then ANYMA played after me there in front of the Pyramids, where I had this, where I don't know if anyone else of the main acts, the big acts that played at the pyramid had this, where they had this light at the top of the big pyramid.
Okay.
Right. Which was still quite far away. You could see them well, but it was like not directly in front of it.
Yep.
But there was this choreography, also with the tracks of him, that, in time at this one drop, I think this huge light beam came from the top of the pyramid just up in the sky.
Okay.
It was like this epic.
Right. And kind of Graham Hancock is in the background, like going, wow, it's finally the evidence that we needed for the lost civilization, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, I don't know, some Egyptian queen or king arose from the grave.
Yeah, always like rolling in their grave, perhaps. Like.
And or that, yeah. And then the pyramid opened and, so it was this kind of moment that was pretty intense. I don't think that anybody else did that there. Okay. And then he played the set there on that side, and then he moved to the main one, and he played another one with the screen. So he basically delivered both there. And
was
that's
there different? You can go on a sec, but was there significant differences musically in those 2 sets? I think you would probably say that the first one was a little bit more of a DJ set vibe, and the other one was more of a live set vibe, I would say. The big hits.
Yeah, with the visuals in combination, how it always is.
Yeah.
But this also shows a little bit his approach of how Afterlife also got so big. Because it's basically this full dedication. So some people complain about the screens. Some people want the screens. Not just some, but a lot want the screens.
Yeah,
but then suddenly it feels like also a lot are complaining, even though probably it was much less than the ones who liked it.
Some people online who appear to be more significant than they actually are. Right?
The negativity always comes in a bit louder, right?
Yeah.
And so, he offers both. Easy. Just execute. That's his mindset.
Fair enough.
And that's how this. If I would have to sum it up, how this success story came up together, it would be that metaphor. Yeah.
Right.
coming up with like innovative stuff and then just making it happen and available.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's an interesting question that we'll return to. Just the last ANYMA show thing I wanted to cover was the Travis Scott show, which in Ibiza this summer at Universe, which you were also present at. I remember I got a 15-minute voice note breaking this down. Right. So if you want to just maybe you can just play that voice note actually, but like I mean this is pretty remarkable. And again, I mean this did actually provoke some discussion in the dance press and a lot of discussion online. But I mean, you know, people had some opinions on this collaboration. I mean, obviously, Ibiza has been somewhere that, you know, hip hop guys have been going for decades now. Yeah. You know, like they absolutely like going there. From, I suppose, who was the first high profile person to go? Probably P. Diddy, about a couple of decades ago or something. But this, I don't think any of them actually got on stage in this kind of a way. Certainly not. I can't remember a performance by an American hip hop act in this kind of a way.
Also
anyway,
not in that scale.
They probably maybe they probably played their own show, but actually like participating in the show of a you know, a conventional dance music act as what happened, right? So yeah, talk about what happened.
Yeah, and that also brings in one of the first observations that I had. I think that was also part of the voice message that I sent you. That has been also discussed, but maybe not in the way maybe it should have been discussed, is the mix of cultural approaches and the mix of cultural scenes and just genres and areas of culture and pop music, if you will. And that it had like a connectivity in there. It was a multicultural event because of that. It felt much more multicultural on many levels than every other dance event I've ever been to on Ibiza.
Okay, right.
Like by far, you know, like even before that actual Travis Scott moment during the night. I played the opening slot. I played a 2 hours live set first slot. But even then I realized, okay, I've never played to a crowd like this before. It's completely mixed.
Yeah.
Like from different countries, from different cultural backgrounds, different mixed styles of clothing. I mean, that's an interesting aspect, you know, like you can say that it's out of techno puristic reasons. This is kind of a negative mix up because like, what are we doing here? Like, are we losing our soul? You can have this argument, but maybe that's not the right event to kind of hold this expectation to anyways.
Oh, no, absolutely not, yeah. Sure. I mean, but Ibiza has always been that to an extent anyway. Yeah. It's always been the kind of legend of Ibiza anyway. It's always been different people coming from different parts of the world, you know, dancing under the stars, all the rest of it. That's the kind of legend of Ibiza. Yeah.
But there is also, you know, also with Kanye music, also with Black Coffee, there is a different cultural mix now, I think, which is something that has to be appreciated, I think. And that also happened on that event. Okay. Even though if I want to look at it from a subjective electronic music nerd perspective, I probably would have been caught off guard a little bit, you know, like, but just from a musical viewpoint, because for me, something like this would not be how I would describe, or I wouldn't use something like that as an example to describe why I went into electronic music in the first place, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
You know, if you want to put it like that. But I want to look at it from different angles also, you know. I don't want to look at only from the techno purist point of view, because, like I said, that's not the event to do that for. And the place was going wild in regard that the crowd was just absolutely mental. it was ram packed, and this has always been.
Had you ever been to that venue before? Because obviously Universe is the new version of what was. I actually can't. I'm blanking on what it was most recently called, but it was called Coup before that, back in the day. And this is the biggest club in Ibiza. It's 10,000 cap. Enormous.
Yeah, there was one Afterlife event there before the pandemic, like one closing.
Privilege, it was called before.
Yeah, Privilege. Yeah, and that's when I've been there. But obviously they completely redesigned it also. And
yeah, I heard that by the end of Privilege, it was like a major fire hazard, and like it was kind of like lucky that nothing really bad happened there.
Yeah.
But obviously, it's been done up at enormous expense.
One thing that I learned since I went to Ibiza for the first time, I think in 2012 or 2013, for playing at Enter for Richie Houghton. One thing that I learned is that the most important currency for showing that an event works is how packed it is.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
and not just on the dance floor, also in the DJ booth.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's certainly been a development over that time. Because I thought you were going to say was the VIP area, because that's actually the single most important thing.
I mean, that's the actual most important thing. But when it comes from the looks, because to be honest, the VIP thing comes if it looks packed.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, the VIPs want to go to a popular event.
Yeah. So that's when it comes to numbers, that's the most important one. Yeah. But from the semantics, the being packed is number one.
Oh yeah, I mean it has to be, because I mean ultimately Enter didn't quite work, which seems crazy, because arguably that was sort of set the template to a certain extent. I would say maybe for Afterlife, like just the way that the way that Enter as a night was put together, with the branding to it, the little details, all of that stuff. But they found it tough. They definitely found it tough.
Yeah.
And that was at Space, and the capacity of Space I think was something like 6,000 or something. So I mean, getting 6,000 people into a club every week.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's a tall order. Even in somewhere like Ibiza, where there is a big audience, of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So okay, let's talk a bit about how are we? Okay, we've got a little bit of time. How this stuff has affected your music, because I mean, obviously we've obviously covered previously that you're in this area, but perhaps not typical of this area, and increasingly so, I think. But your music has actually changed a bit in the last few years. It's definitely got more. I remember we were talking about doing a collab, and you were like, the drums have to be driving. That's what you said to me. And I was listening to your recent stuff this morning, and it is more high energy. It definitely is. Is that a direct result of playing these shows? How has that affected it? Because I mean, your music has always been rooted in your live set, I think it's fair to say. Like it's
to some regard, yeah. I would say not just these particular shows, but in general, playing out these days, especially as a live act, you realize that the production levels changed. Not even in a way of saying it got better or worse, but it just is different now. It is hitting harder these days. Maybe it's because of also equipment, like the Pioneer V10 mixer is different, or the CDJs got different, or the softwares, the digital audio workstations got different, the effects and the plugins got better or more effective, whatever.
Easier to mix down an impactful track.
Exactly.
Definitely.
And but maybe also the ears changed. Things have to be a little bit more on point, a little bit more in the front.
Expectations change.
Yeah. And aesthetics change, and in order to not completely go under after a DJ plays a full energy set, maybe as a live act, I also wanted to have some tracks that are a little bit more driving. But that's not just because of the Afterlife shows. That's in general playing out. That is almost everywhere a factor now. But it brought up a lot of questions regarding how far do I want to go, and where's the level where I feel comfortable with. And that level is not very far. The comfortability that has to be matched is within certain boundaries that are not so far put. And that brought me a lot into like questions like, how far do I want to go? How far would I have to go in order to still like be recognizable or still be functional within these new and changed environments? I made a lot of, I thought a lot about this. I made a lot of reflections about this topic especially in the last half year, I would say. Yeah, because right now I'm working also for a project where I'm making music for an orchestra, and that's a completely different way of thinking. And I also made music for an artist that is a contemporary artist in terms of creating installations. I posted that on Instagram also recently, and I made music for this installation piece, and that's a completely different approach. And it's not the first time that I also do these type of things. You know, when you, for example, remember at the album Dämmerlicht of 2018, where I did this 2 shows, album release events at Säule at Berghain with this structure that I built with this light structure. That was also a very orchestral type of album and not as driving, and a more mix of downbeat electronic and classical music. So that's also an aspect, and the more I do now at these days within these parameters, I also start to think a lot. Where are my actual boundaries? Where do I want to set the boundaries? And I think when you say that also my music changed, I would also agree. For example, in different album tracks like Karat or Dust. They are definitely pounding in a different way, but that's pretty much for the moment. And also my Ens Lucis, my last release that I have on the series that is going on right now on Plangent, those are as much as driving as I want to go at the moment. Okay. I wouldn't.
They're quite driving.
Yeah, I wouldn't go further than that. Actually, the one that I want to put out next in the series is much slower, much more subtle.
Okay.
Yeah.
The classic Recondite sound.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, actually, yes.
Okay.
That one is more classic Recondite sound. Yeah. Yeah, but that's a big question that comes. That a lot of aspects come from this question. Oh, sorry, from this question of where are the boundaries and what would be needed to meet current potential expectations, and how far can you adapt your boundaries to that, and or not.
Yeah, I mean, this comes to the final topic I want to talk about, which is the notion of art and culture, and popular culture in particular, and dance music as a part of popular culture, very specifically. I mean, you talked just there about doing stuff with an artist, an actual artist, you know, because everyone in music is called an artist, but really it's an abbreviation of recording artist, which is not quite the same thing, I don't think. Generally speaking, over time, it's it's certainly applied to people who I would definitely say are not proper artists. Yeah. But of course, all of this depends on the definition of art that you're using, of course, you know, and many people have an extremely wide definition, which it completely would. And if you're following that kind of thing, it would be reasonable to include anyone doing anything that could be considered to be creative, including any music to be that. I have to say, I'm not really. I have a bit of a more strict definition of art that I tend to. I've been trying to pin it down exactly, but my instinct is definitely to be more strict about what I consider to be arts. But talk a little bit about the approach to making music, which is, you know, functional. It's for something specifically, but it's also attempting to do something which is a bit more than that, if I can be woolly and not unspecific about this. Talk about how you think about that. Yeah, I mean, do you have a definition of art, for example? Well, like, where do you stand on that one?
Yeah, you mentioned that you have a little bit more of a strict definition. I tend to have a less strict definition, to be honest. I would say, for me, first of all, art is not objective. Art cannot be objective in my point of view. It's there comes a certain universal judgmental factor to art when you look at, for example, there is one good approach that I liked, that I met during my studies when it comes to the when it comes to Immanuel Kant, and when he says that art cannot be objective, but there is subjective universality, universally, subjective universality.
Universality is what.
Universality, that's the word that I
Yeah.
was looking for. I'm always in subjektive Universalität. And
Okay,
that's,
no, it's fine. It's fine. Real-time translation is,
yeah. Which says that it cannot be objective, but there are subjective receptions that combine to some universal appearances and things that we can agree on, you know? And that's kind of how I would say that art works. Because you could say that, for example, somebody like, do you know Joseph Beuys, the German artist that
Boyce?
Yeah. With the Y, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He says that everybody's an artist, basically. Not in terms of like everybody can make great art, but it's an anthropological
Yeah, this
potential.
is the kind of modernist, I think, take on it, right?
Yeah. And
I have to say, I have no time for that idea, but carry on.
Yeah. No, I'm also not completely in that camp, but I see where he's coming from in terms of like who defines it then, you know, like who says that this is like then really proper art, you know, like it's a problem who takes the right to judge then, you know, if maybe then the subjective universality thing would apply, that yes, there I could agree with that there is some universal subjective judgment available, but that is not an objective definition of art in general. You know, you can't say, okay, now I decide this is art. You can do it maybe for your own art, but I think it's difficult to just decide that for somebody else's art. And when you talk about this universality, what drives this universality? And I think it's connectivity. And connectivity, when you look at connectivity from a sociological viewpoint, like Niklas Luhmann's system theory, where it says that systems in a society, they are built on connectivity. And if connectivity creates subjective universality, for example, you know, like because we have to agree upon, and this agreement comes in out of forums, out of reviews, out of ratings, whatever.
Yep.
How many people play it in the radio or on a DJ set or whatever, when we stay in music. Those ratings, they depend on connectivity, and connectivity is something that changed because of social media. And there is a new way of judgment that is connected to connectivity. You know, a different way of how we connect each other to come up with this subjective universality. You know,
right, to come up with things which are agreed, generally agreed, within society,
exactly.
and within groups of people.
And now this connectivity is built in a different way. It's built in a system that is numbers driven and metrics driven. So there has been a shift in how we understand subjective universality.
Subjective universality.
Universality.
I know, it's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah. Because we are more trained in looking at metrics and using metrics as an aesthetical judgment aspect, which it cannot be, because an aesthetical judgment is always subjective.
Right.
You know,
Sure.
like how can you say that's aesthetically great and this is supposed to be true for everybody? You know, how is that possible? You know?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose underpinning that, and kind of, or either underpinning it or kind of like looming over it, is the difference between art and culture, or on whether there is any subjective difference, whether there is any substantive difference.
I don't think
between
so,
the
to
two
be
things.
honest.
Okay.
In my opinion, there is no substantial difference between these things, because sometimes something comes up as being culturally very, very relevant as art. You know, art comes out and it is kind of an amplificator for a cultural development, or a representation of a cultural development. Like, for example, some musical style that would maybe be representative for a cultural movement or something, like, let's say, the hip hop movement. But this also sometimes really comes out of the blue. You know, like it's nothing that was planned. There was this music being created, and you could call it this art, and out of that, a whole cultural movement was created. So I think it's very intertwined, and also in electronic music as well. I mean, I would say that, of course, subjectively, I would say, from my personal point of view, a lot of techno tracks are not art for me. But I wouldn't say it's not art in general, because whatever is art, I don't really even care about this label, to be honest. I don't even care if people call me an artist or not. I don't even. Every time I say I'm an artist, I feel a little bit weird, and I don't say this in the understatement way. Not at all. I'm very confident about what I do.
But I think that sort of implies the baggage that the term art and artist carries with it.
That's true,
right? Because I mean, it does carry implication, and everyone, I think, has their own definition to some extent, but also I think has an idea that in some way it's inherently of value, right? And that the artist is someone to be, you know, looked up to. It's almost like, you know, Plato's Philosopher Kings. Do you know what I mean? It's like this is an example of someone who is doing something inherently almost unattainable to the average person, right? That's almost like the kind of the perception that many people have of someone who is considered to be an artist. And this is kind of like why I push back so strongly on the idea that anyone who works in the music industry on the creative side is an artist, because that doesn't fit, I think, with most people's perception of the definition of, I mean, forget about art, but an artist.
Yeah.
Right.
But as soon as you start like looking at the term a little bit more detailed, I think it's quite it kind of makes sense to look at it a little bit more, to look at the art term a little bit more differentiated in terms of, okay, are we actually putting too much weight on the term, and therefore putting too much weight on who or too much weight on the judgment of what is art, or can we actually agree upon, first of all, everything could be in theory art, because suddenly we have, for example, a Joseph Beuys installation of honey and dirt, for example, and it completely hypes up and everybody loves it, and it's from Museum of Modern Art to Guggenheim or whatever, and then, I mean, what do you want to say then? It's not art?
Well, it's also like, you know, I mean, a commonly complained about example is Banksy, right? Who's just doing these stencils on a wall, and you know, opinions sharply divide on this, right? Yeah. Many people are extremely sniffy about it, and other people consider it to be, some of his works to be, you know, genuinely profound.
I mean, look at somebody who's just painting some pictures at home with a pencil. Completely meaningless stuff, maybe, in my point of view. But then if that stuff suddenly would gain subjective universality, what do you do?
So let me connect this to AI, because I think this is going to change people's. I mentioned before, like what I consider to be the sort of prevailing view of art and artists in society amongst just the kind of lay person, the average person in the street who's working a regular job, has this perception of art and artists, and this technology has come along. And I was having a conversation with someone this morning about this, actually a coder, and they were, you know, playing down the significance of LLMs and their ability to displace people in the IT industry, which is, up until quite recently been one of the kind of things that people have suggested that it's going to disrupt the most. That opinion seems to be shifting slightly. But one aspect that AI has already disrupted without question is graphic design, and people who have definitely considered themselves to be artists, and people who I think society in general would have considered to be artists.
Yeah.
But they have been, I think, disrupted probably as much as anyone else has by this technology in a way which I think calls into question what they were doing in the first place, perhaps.
Yeah, and now we're getting into interesting territory, I think. Because now the question is, but can the LLM that creates graphics and maybe replace a graphic designer then actually make art? And that's the question that's a big elephant in the room. So basically, is art only if it comes from human? That's a whole new debate.
Well, is an AI prompt in of itself artistic?
Yeah, I mean, what I ask myself sometimes, are there already kids out there that make interesting stuff with AI prompts? I mean, I actually don't know. I would like to know. I would like, maybe some people can put it in the comments if they know it. But because I actually think that there might be, come up with stuff where we're like, what the is this? Like, I've never heard something like this. Yeah, they completely prompted it. It's completely prompt stuff. Like, it's insane. What this completely.
Yeah, I mean, there is this assumption, I think, amongst some musicians that AI music can only ever sound like something else. But it's that logic does not hold up, because any music that is made is a result of influences.
Yeah, true.
Right? So there's never going to be any, completely original piece of music. But go on, sorry.
Sorry. No, I interrupted you. Sorry. But one thing where I'm a little bit skeptical, and not skeptical in the sense of like judgmental, but in the observation way, in an observing way, is does the talk itself within artist scenes, graphic designer scenes, musician scenes, the talk itself that we will be replaced, that we potentially will be replaced by an entity that is able to do it better than us maybe at some point. Doesn't that talk already kill creativity? I think that's at the moment the much bigger danger. And I think that's part of the explanation that you talked about, the crisis of recorded music industry and stuff, because it's not a creatively uplifting and invigorating environment because of this talk. And this talk is everywhere, almost in every job and genres.
Oh, it's real end of the world stuff. The end is nigh.
And that's in for me personally, it makes creativity kind of a little bit uninteresting, because I feel, okay, well then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, like a limit is placed.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can't have those limits if you're going to be, if you're going to realize fully a creative idea.
Yeah, and I think for artistry, semantics and unspoken vibes are sometimes the fuel of things, like perception, sensitivity of zeitgeist or of movements, cultural movements, maybe personal stuff, whatever, despair, happiness, subconscious antennas for these type of things. And if you really have open antennas, then interesting stuff arises, and you do stuff where subjective universality suddenly comes because people can connect to it and nobody did before. But it is needed. That's when Rick Rubin says it's in the universe, just somebody has to grab it and fulfill it, but it's already there. And that's when the subjective universality comes, and then everybody says, oh, that's amazing art, because we needed that, and this kind of thought is a little bit compromised because of the talk of being replaced by AI. I think that's the biggest problem at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of putting it, actually. Yeah, because the idea that potential is infinite, right? That's at the bottom of that, that kind of Rick Rubin thing. And it's the kind of, Steve Jobs providing things to humanity that they didn't know they ever needed, but they realize actually that's the whole thing. But if there is this inevitable future which is dominated by a machine, then how can we ever hope to, pluck those things out of the universe? It's definitely inherently inhibiting.
Yeah.
Creativity.
It implies some meaninglessness, and that's not very inspiring. And that's why I agree with you what you said in the recent, I think it was in the solo pod, or maybe one before, when you said that basically it's a repetition. It's constantly also not just immediate repetition, but also styles that people appreciate, that have been around since 40 years. When you had the Queen's example,
right,
with the catalog of Queen.
Yes, exactly, which is still chugging away.
Yeah, and I think that's a testament to the innovation somehow is a little bit hindered. The innovativeness is not at its strongest at the moment.
And the pace has definitely slowed substantially.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the question is, why is that? And what we talked about just now is one reason for that. And maybe also, I think about that too sometimes, and mathematicians probably can give a better answer on that. But is it also mathematically infinite, music itself? In the Western way that we think about music.
Well, that's it, because it's not infinite, is it? And actually, there's some interesting people, actually, funnily enough, that I've been following on Instagram, who are doing stuff with alternative tunings and halfway up, half tuning to half a semitone, this kind of things. I think just to look for stuff which does sound different. Because obviously there is a finite amount of melodies, there's a finite amount of rhythms. Do you know what I mean? For sure there are. I think there was some attempt to predict when all melodies would be used up in recorded music, and it was I think we probably passed the date. But that's the thing. But that's the thing about recorded music when you compare it to previous eras of music, is that actually what is written down, what would have been written down on the stave, is a very small part actually of a record. Yeah. Because the timbre of the sound, all of the choices that are made when you make a record, actually quite a small number of them are musical, in the traditional sense of the word. Yeah. Right. And I suppose that's part of what is so frustrating about services like Suno, when you're generating a track at the touch of a button, is that all of those hundreds of decisions that go into the making of a record, forget about the music, but the actual sound of a record, those decisions are gone. They're made for you. Yeah. So I mean, that's just as a last question, actually, because we're running out of time. I think there's two sides to the AI debate in music. One is the ethics of doing that, of using Suno and just bypassing the songwriting process and the recording process. But then the other ethical question, is purely the use of AI tools that have been trained on people on unlicensed work made by other people.
Unlicensed work?
Unlicensed work.
Unlicensed.
Yeah. So a plugin, for example, which is going to do some of the work for you, and using a model which has been trained on music which hasn't been paid for. So the ethics of of that side of it, which are two completely different things, and I think elicit very different responses from musicians. Because I think the first one, almost without exception, maybe past a certain age anyway, the Suno model, people do not like that at all. Experienced musicians do not like that at all. But on the other side, people seem to be a bit more, maybe I would use something to work up a vocal, help me get an idea for a vocal or something like that.
Yeah. But that was the unlicensed part,
well,
right?
the assumption is that it's unlicensed, because obviously there are tools being developed with licensed data, which obviously does solve that problem.
Yeah. So the second part, I would totally agree if it would be licensed, if I understand correctly what you said.
Yes.
If, for example, if there is an aspect used by somebody that created this, and then this piece of instrumentary, whatever is licensed, and is actually the person that made it is profiting of my use within this LLM or mod, or this Suno model, whatever it is, I would agree with that. I would be more opposed if it would be not licensed, of course. And the first question was if it's ethical at all, for example, to prompt music in Suno, in general, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think
Is it cheating, basically?
Is it cheating? Maybe it is, but honestly, if as this question is answered as soon as somebody comes up with like insane stuff.
Okay, so if it's good, then that kind of makes it okay.
If it's new and not just for the sake of being new, but for the sake of blowing minds phenomenologically.
Sure.
Because that's maybe another really important question and aspect for me personally for art. Art is phenomenologically working. It's giving me goosebumps. You know,
Okay.
I describe it in a way. Wow.
So basically, so if it's good, then lots of things can be excused.
If it really adds something new to the
Sure.
thing,
Okay.
then I like new. I don't like the term new. I hate the term new, but I don't know what to if it adds something different, something innovative, something that we didn't have before. I'm not always looking for these things in my life, like new values, innovation. It's not that I say that that's what I'm looking for, but I'm just saying when I want to say like is prompted music ethically, let's say, does it have a right to exist even? Then I say if it adds something to the mix that hasn't been done before, then absolutely yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And that remains to be seen, you know. Like
Sure.
I told, like that's what I said. I want to see in the comments if there are people that say, okay, look at these kids, what they are doing with the prompting. That's insane stuff. We have never heard this before. I want to see that.
Yeah,
Because-
I mean, I would be excited
Yeah.
if that's happening.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I want to see
Yeah.
it because I mean, like you say, I mean, it's not new for the sake of being new. But
Yeah.
if something, the most impactful things are or often the most impactful things that you experience are new to you.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I've never heard that before. That's it.
Yeah.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Lawrence, this has been great, man.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate so much that you had me on again. I love doing these conversations with you, and I have a big respect for your project.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.